Leverage is also defined by Professor John Ruggie and the UN Guiding Principles. Your actions will depend on whether the relationship you are in, directly linked to, is a crucial business relationship or a non-crucial business relationship. And this is defined, crucial business relationships are actually defined as those business relationships that you cannot live without. Say you're selling a very special machine, and the spare parts for that machine has been developed by your supplier over many years, and it's not possible to find another supplier that can substitute the supplier you are using. Then that supplier that you have built the relationship and who have developed these vital parts of the machine that you are selling becomes a crucial business relationship. So crucial business relationships are those that you will basically die without, where your company could go bankrupt if you are not able to either purchase their goods or have them as a customer. And often those relationships are mutually crucial. So if you have leverage, and there's a negative impact with the business relationship, you make sure that the business relationship handles the negative impact. You could and may ask them also to provide access to remedy, because this is their company that caused or contributed to the adverse impact, and you are merely linked to the adverse impact. And then you should ensure, of course, that they show human rights due diligence when they move forward, so that they themselves manage this risk of adverse impacts that was obviously not managed well, but where you would hope they would manage in the future and also manage other risks of adverse impacts. Now, if you have no leverage, this is a large company and you're only a small customer, then you may lack leverage. But mind you, it's a crucial business relationship. You can't just leave them. So you should, of course, continue to seek to increase your leverage, your ability to influence the company to achieve a situation where they actually handle the impact and demonstrate due diligence going forward. If this is unsuccessful, if you can't build leverage, come back to how you can build leverage, then as a company, you should at least be able to demonstrate also to your stakeholders that you are continuously trying to increase leverage, and then examine the opportunities in the longer term to end the business relationship, because since it's a crucial business relationship, you can't leave it immediately. And the guiding principles laconically tells you that if there is no way out of that challenge, and you can never make the crucial business relationship change its business operations, then you just have to accept the consequences of maintaining it. And these consequences are primarily reputational. But of course, they can be hard on your company. If we speak about investors, they are very seldom in a position where their business relationships are crucial. You invest in a lot of companies and you do not depend on one investment, so it will often be possible for you to stop the relationship if you have no success in increasing your leverage. You may have a few crucial business relationships on the supply side, if that could be software, or it could be other business relationships where you are depending on their services or products in order to run your business. And of course, in those relationships, you will have to make sure that they do their due diligence to try to mitigate adverse impacts, so that you do not end up in a situation where you have to ask them to change their business conduct. With non-crucial, i.e. exchangeable business relationships, if you have leverage, you will ask them to do the same, handle the negative impact. The business relationship, you ask them to provide access to remedy. You should ask them to provide access to remedy. And of course, you should ensure that they then can demonstrate due diligence going forward, that they can become transparent about how they manage their impacts and how they measure effectiveness of that. If you lack leverage, then you have to ask yourself whether you can increase the leverage to achieve what you would have achieved if you had leverage, but do this with reasonable means, because if it's impossible or unsuccessful, you just end the business relationship. It is exchangeable, it's non-crucial, and you can replace it with another business relationship. You can move your investment from one company to the next company. So leverage kicks in when something has gone wrong. And leverage is also defined by the guiding principles. So you evaluate whether you have leverage from these 7 elements. Degree of direct control. So of course, the larger your investment is, the more control you may have in the company. You may, as a capital fund, you may invest in the share majority of a company, and of course then you have full control and it's considered a subsidiary, and it's, of course, due diligence should be carried out in all your companies where you have direct control. But you may also have a smaller stake, but still a stake of 20% that would allow you to have, for example, a person in the board of directors. So that is the degree of control, and the more control you have, the more leverage, of course, you have to make sure that the company in question stops its impact and make sure they don't reoccur. Terms of contract is another way to increase leverage. It's clear that if you have in your legal contracts with a company, have inserted the consequences for that company if they don't do due diligence, or if they have severe impacts and do not inform you and do not manage them well, then you have a larger leverage towards that company, because there can be contractual consequences if they're not managing the severe impact. It's an expectation from the upcoming Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive that you should make sure that it becomes part of the contract once you have experienced these severe impacts. Another way of increasing leverage or having leverage is the proportion of the business that you represent for the entity. It's clearly that if you buy 20%, or what represents 20% of the turnover for a supplier, you are in very important business relationship to that supplier, and you will have more leverage. If you only buy 0.1% of their turnover, you may have very little leverage. They can easily find other customers. So the mere volume of what you buy, its value, is of course important for leverage or determining leverage. And that somehow that connects to number 4, your ability to incentivize the entity to improve sustainability performances. Because you could mention for the business relationship, whether it's a customer or it's a supplier or an investment, you could mention that if you're good at dealing with this issue at hand and making sure that you conduct due diligence going forward, then you will consider investing more in that company or buying more, or so to say, selling this. But it could also be other ways that you could incentivize the entity to improve their performance. You could provide them some training. You could also incentivize them in a range of other ways. The fifth element that has to be included when you determine whether you have leverage or not are the benefits or harm to the entity's reputation, depending on collaboration. So it's clear if a lot of investors come together and go to a company and say, you did not manage this severe impact well, and we would also like you to implement human rights due diligence moving forward, it may have a lot of harm to that entity's reputation. Whereas your single approach may be less if you do not carry high brand value yourself. So, but use reputation as a way to improve your leverage towards a company in question. Finally, and that's points 6 and 7, you may engage others. So you may incentivize other enterprises. It could be fellow investors, as you would do it. So a lot of pension funds come together to raise the demand, sometimes even at the General Assembly, to have the company deal with the adverse impact and make sure that they implement due diligence. It could also be that you go to your business associations, or a company goes to its business association to ask the business association to put pressure on the company that causes or contributes to the adverse impacts. And finally, you may also increase your leverage by engaging local or central government. An example of this came from the fashion industry, the clothing industry, that were buying cotton from Uzbekistan. And it was found by investigations that that cotton was harvested by the use of forced labor, being the state-owned enterprises having school children and their teachers go and pick the harvest when the season was there. And the fashion industry members tried to address this directly with the Uzbek government and did not succeed in having change occurring, and finally took it up with the European Commission. And today you can actually buy cotton from Uzbekistan that is where there's no forced labor involved in the picking of the cotton. So in this incident, the companies participating in that industry engaged EU, a multilateral institution for several governments. And we have seen similar in the pharmaceutical industry, where you could use export control as a way to ensure that your product is not misused in some markets. So this is the final concept, leverage. So just to sum up, there are 3 ways that you as an investor can be connected to adverse impacts. You may cause adverse impact. So what you do leads to an adverse impact. Goes for your own operations. You may discriminate people who apply to work for you. You may even apply artificial intelligence in your processes somewhere that have biases ingrained in them from the information they harvested when developed. That's causing. You have, as an investor, to do your own impact assessment, find out where you're at risk of causing adverse impacts, describe what you do to prevent or mitigate those, and measure the effectiveness. And you may also contribute to adverse impacts. So you do something, another company does something, and that leads to an adverse impact. That should be assessed in your impact assessment for your own operations. And here you have to be aware that John Ruggie wrote a piece on how being linked to adverse impacts, which is the normal state for investors, can actually move to a situation where you will be considered contributing to an adverse impact. So the example that John Ruggie used for the paper was a situation where you invest in a company or a project. There are severe impacts. You are doing nothing to address those severe impacts with the company or the project, but you continue to invest in that company. So now you're moving from a situation where you were merely linked to an adverse impact, where you'll be considered contributing to the adverse impact. But for most investors, this is a situation where they would have disinvested when they came to the situation where there were severe impacts and they had no leverage over the entity. So your assessment in your own company covers where you're at risk of causing or contributing to adverse impact. And then you have to require from all your business relationships that they also make that assessment and become transparent towards you, as you should be transparent to them on the results of your due diligence. So in the vast majority of investors' involvement in human rights, adverse human rights impacts occur through the investment. And of course, most investors have policies for responsible investment, and in those, you should of course require all your investments to do their due diligence, so that you thereby seek to prevent and mitigate adverse impacts from occurring. That is the best way to seek to prevent and mitigate adverse impacts occurring in your investment, i.e. in your value chain. So first, manage impacts in your own operations and make sure that you require from your business relationships, your investments, that they manage their impacts. finally, if it goes wrong, if you become aware of severe adverse impacts anywhere in your value chain with your investments, then you need to use your leverage to make it stop. And if you have no leverage, then you need to build leverage through these seven elements are ways for you to increase your leverage to make sure that the company who's causing or contributing to the adverse impacts listen and change their business practice. So with this, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some knowledge about the key concepts in the UN guiding principles. Thank you.